There's our recording. Hopefully you've all heard that as well. What we have here, the SBG VSWIR entered Phase A earlier this year, and we have a small group of part-time people who've been working and reaching out to colleagues and subject matter experts to support the SBG VSWIR project as we head toward the NASA development cycle and the review that's coming up, the SRR. Now, we're focusing on the VSWIR, but SBG, of course, is a VSWIR TIR mission, and priorities in the decadal survey require both. So while we won't say too much about the TIR, we expect to have a future briefing with them. But right now, we're going to focus on the VSWIR. There's more than enough to talk about. And you'll hear from a range of the colleagues, the coordinators who've been working together as we prepare to support SBG. So these are the topics we'll try to cover in less than 90 minutes. So there's time for questions. We will have collect Q&A. I think you can see that Q&A button and put your Q&A. We'll pick those up and try to address them at the end. There's also, I think, a form to submit questions. We commit. If we can't answer them all in the 90 minutes, we'll get back to you and make sure we have answers. And of course, this recording of this video, the slides, and the science and application traceability matrix will be made available as well in a week or so. These are the topics we'll attempt to cover. I'm not going to read through them all. You're going to hear them as we go. It's a packed agenda, and let's get going where I kick off. So we're very excited. SBG is in Phase A. That means we're on the track through the NASA development cycle to launch a mission into space to address the priorities called for in the decadal survey. And the project science and applications team that you're hearing from are really focused right now, again, all working part-time, on getting the information ready to support the system requirements review. And that's going to be September 27th, 28th, and 29th. Right now, that's where it's scheduled. But there's an overall schedule for SBG into space, the VSWIR and the TIR, and we're so excited to be on this path that many of us have been working towards for quite some time. So what is a system requirements review? This is where in the life cycle of a NASA mission, we look at the project requirements. That means the specifications that are required. Are they achievable? Are they consistent? Do we understand them? Are they consistent with NASA's commitments, and are they appropriate to fulfill the mission needs? So we're working, and that's what we hear about. That's what we've been working to provide that information from the perspective of project requirements, products, and algorithms. Key terms, again, there's some definitions in the back, would be requirements, range, margin, calibration, algorithm, parameterization, training, tuning, verification, validation, uncertainty, quantification, harmonization. These are things that we've been worrying about and folding in as we go down this process of supporting for the system requirements review. So here we are with SBG VSWIR. It's called for from the decadal survey. It delivers a set of most and very important objectives across the decadal survey focus areas, and that was key for us to be where we are right now. So whether it reflects ecosystem and natural resources, the solid earth, hydrology, climate, or whether there are elements of the SBG and the SBG VSWIR that support that. As indicated, it includes both a VSWIR and a TIR space element, and we will use measurements from both to address the priorities in various balanced ways. Now, you may also be aware that there is the EMIT imaging spectrometer launched last year to the space station, which is a good spectrometer. But what we're talking about is something that will have more than 10 times the capability of EMIT. So this is really quite extraordinary, and I'm so excited to be involved, as I know the team, and I think you are as well. And even more so, SBG is part of NASA's Future Earth System Observatory, which is the forward-looking future approach, looking at the Earth as a system, and SBG fits into that as we move in that direction under NASA's Earth Science Division. So we fit in here as well, and we're committed to treat the Earth as a system. And what does that mean for us in terms of the VSWIR spectroscopy? The decadal priorities can be thought of as addressing hydrology, snow and ice, aquatic ecosystems, terrestrial ecosystems, solid earth, and of course we must deal with the atmosphere, which we look through. And that's a system. All those elements are present. In some cases, they're all present in a single spectrum. We measure spectra across the VSWIR range. Here I'm showing off to the right an example of a scene from a MIT in South America. And you can see snow, water, vegetation, and soil all in the scene. In fact, there are some spectra that contain all four elements, and there are some of the reflectance spectra from a MIT. So again, we absolutely are approaching the Earth as a system, and our observations are fully consistent with that and how we tease apart the products and algorithms and uncertainties to address the priorities also involve treating the Earth as a system. Why do we know we're going to be successful? At least that's my view. We've got a long track record with airborne and spaceborne demonstration missions addressing at the local and sometimes regional scale terrestrial ecology, aquatic ecology, hydrology, and geology. I'm not going to go into the details. These charts will be available to you, but we've got good evidence. You can see spectra and products across these domains that, again, are aligned with the decadal, but with SBG VSWIR, we can take this global now, which is what's desperately needed for our planet. In addition, there are applications that come from these observations that many are familiar with, whether it's agriculture and food security, water quality, coastal zones, conservation, wildfire and recovery, disasters and hazards, geology and applications, and even climate change mitigation. We've shown, and I'll give an example, that these observations were actually quite good at seeing both methane and carbon dioxide points and localized sources that can be part of the contribution to climate change mitigation. And again, beautiful examples, typically with spectra, biodiversity, harmful algal blooms, mineral resources, water resources, disasters and hazards, Gulf oil spill, fires. The VSWIR spectroscopy has contributions to make in all these applications areas, and we're so excited to, again, take this global and take this to a revisit of 16 days at a minimum to contribute in a way that has not happened before with full spectroscopy for our planet. And again, as I indicated, we also have a role to play in greenhouse gas point sources, and these are some examples from a MIT, which is a VSWIR spectrometer showing beautiful, they're tragic plumes of methane, which we would like to mitigate because it's a greenhouse gas and the spectral signature captured by MIT, and then some large plumes of CO2 coming from a power plant. So again, this is something that we will also offer on the application side with the SBG VSWIR. So where do we sit in terms of the type of observation that we're going to make in supporting the requirements as we head to finishing up phase A and the system requirements review? The spectral range, again, informed by the studies, the decadal survey, and refined with, you'll hear more about the science and application traceability matrix. We're in that range, 380 to 2500 nanometers. We have spectral sampling between 8 and 12. That gives us a range. It will be very close to 10, I predict. We have high signal to noise, high uniformity. We're focused on things that give good measurements, in particular with a focus on the aquatic community where we want low polarization sensitivity. We'll have a ground sampling distance somewhere between 31 and 35 nanometers. That'll depend. Again, the Earth is lumpy, so that'll vary. Less than or equal to 16-day revisit. All the land, surface, inland waters, coastal oceans. And then we have a crossing time somewhere between 10:30 and 11:30. That's still open to a trade. And we'll have a baseline 3-year mission. That's what we're designing for, and possible extensions based on performance. And this is consistent with that designed performance that actually captured the sentence out of the decadal survey. So we're still right in family with what the decadal survey called for. I want to move forward quickly here, but this is the area we're planning to cover at 30 meters, the gray and the purple, and then the white areas will be at 1,000 meters, and we'll have this with 16-day revisit globally, which will be just so exciting going forward. Looking on to applications and products, again, this is a list of the core products which are aligned with the decadal survey most important, very important priorities. So again, clouds, radiance, reflectance, fractional cover, but then into aquatic ecosystem products, terrestrial ecosystem products, snow and ice hydrology products, and geology and solid earth products. We'll also have some atmospheric products. So that's what we're focused on delivering within the project to show that we're aligned with the decadal survey. But I want to emphasize we're very focused on making sure, especially the radiance, the land and water leaving reflectance products are what's needed to enable the broadest possible set of community algorithms. There are other algorithms beyond those we're going to talk about here, which we know exist. Many of them are called out in this wonderful paper by Carrie Cause-Nicholson. And we want to support those community algorithms and your ability to use these measurements for a range of additional products and different approaches to these products. But we have to pick a core to get us to the system requirements review with control for risk, cost, and schedule, so we can pass that review. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Christine Lee, who's going to say a little bit about applications, and then you'll hear from the rest of the team as we go forward. So here we go, Christine.
Thank you, Rob.
All advance the slides.
Okay. Hey, everyone. My name is Christine Lee. I am the applications lead for SBG and a co-coordinator for the aquatic domain with Kelly Lewis. I am really excited to be part of this team and to continue to do work to ensure that applications integration is occurring throughout mission planning and beyond. So just a tiny bit of background, applications have typically been integrated into mission implementation and planning in later phases, often in the form of programs like early adopters and applications workshop. But SBG is really making a huge impact here by integrating and considering the applications community at the onset, starting with pre-phase A, with plans to sustain this engagement and integration throughout the mission life cycle. So it'll allow the applications community needs to propagate throughout the mission. So this is really exciting to be able to be part of this kind of effort. And as such, we see SBG and the team really fitting within the Earth Action Framework, which is a way that the Earth Science Division is currently sort of rethinking how missions, science, and applications, as well as other public-facing activities are well integrated together, often represented in this pyramid kind of format. So SBG, if we can go to the next slide, being very well aligned with being at that base within the Earth System Observatories, providing and enabling new science and applications and tools to provide societal benefit and impact, but also really enabling this step for Earth action solutions. So we'll be talking through across the different domains discussed today, just a few examples of a very clear pathway that we can trace from SBG all the way to provision of societal benefit and impact on decision support. And so really excited to be part of that and to kind of enable this traceability. The last point that I wanted to make on this slide is that, you know, we are really building on the legacy of all of our kind of sister missions, building on Hesperi, PACE, and so forth, and really learning together as a community and showing that SBG has this demonstrated capability to support applications across all of the proposed Earth action themes and needs. So I'll leave it at that and go ahead and hand off to David Thompson to talk about the SATM and Project Core products for decadal priorities. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Christine.
If I could jump in really quickly. We are having trouble with the logins. I clearly did not set it up so that people outside of JPL could get logged in. They can, in fact, call in. This isn't a problem I've had with webinars before, so I sincerely apologize. I'm sending an email out now letting people know that they can call in. Kevin Turpey successfully was able to do that, so that's excellent, and I sincerely apologize. So folks will be getting that update right now, and fortunately all of this is being recorded, so there will be we will continue to answer questions that we receive after the fact. You have my sincere apologies again, and sorry, David, for interjecting.
Not at all. And for those folks who are just dialing in by phone, I'll try and make everything as verbally obvious as possible, in addition to sharing my screen, which I'll do now. All right, so as Rob mentioned, the purpose of the SRR preparation is to really establish the system requirements of the mission and demonstrate that those requirements that we're levying on the instrument and the spacecraft are sufficient to build the kind of system to meet the decadal survey objectives. So the decadal survey was really the charter document of SBG VSWIR. It lays out, broadly speaking, instrument performance that Rob also described. And coverage requirements. In addition to that, there's been an effort to elicit needs from the community through the SBG Algorithms Working Group. And I'm sure that many of you have been a part of those working groups or have seen the output of that Algorithms Working Group, where the community itself said, these are the target accuracies that we'd like to achieve for all of the different products that might meet these SBG goals. And so part of the goal of this traceability exercise that I'm going to describe is to really link those two, to demonstrate that the decadal survey instrument that we're going to build will actually meet the needs of the scientific community, that we can form an error budget that includes both instrument noise terms, calibration error that we incur over the course of the mission, and also the algorithm uncertainties in any retrievals, and that error budget would meet the accuracy needs of the community. So this will help demonstrate that the instrument is sufficient. And the error budgets are just a good thing to have in any case because they enable quantitative modeling to inform design decisions. So as the instrument design comes together and crystallizes, we can assess the impact of different instrument design decisions and different changes in performance on all the different suite of SBG products. And of course, SBG it will serve a wide range of science objectives. So this exercise will really include products from all the different major categories that was described before. Another major goal of this activity is to determine the observation scenarios that drive instrument performance. We, of course, span the whole range of disciplines from cryosphere to terrestrial and aquatic ecology to geology and more. And some of these measurements, some of these products are more difficult to produce than others. So it really helps to have an understanding of what the driving needs are that will force us to make those instrument design decisions in future mission phases. So our approach to this traceability has been to simplify a little bit, to establish reference observation cases for each of the SBG products. And we'll talk about these products and how they're produced, the science data system analyses in later speakers. But for now, we're just going to assume that we do have these products. And for each one, come up with a typical observation that SBG might perform. So in the case of a coral reef observation, we would specify the observing geometry, the atmospheric conditions, and then the benthic reflectance, where we're trying to measure that coral characteristic. And then for each of those observation cases, for each of the SBG products, we'll calculate a local linearized retrieval. We'll simulate small changes in the quantity of interest we're trying to measure, and then use that to form a relationship, a locally linear relationship mapping changes in the radiance that the instrument observes onto changes in the quantity of the interest. So this is not a general purpose retrieval algorithm. It's simply a classical linear error propagation for that specific reference observation. And indeed, we're just propagating instrument noise and calibration error. So at this point, we're really only concerned about the error induced by the instrument because those are the requirements that we're trying to specify at this stage in the mission life cycle. And so we can assess calibration errors and forward propagate instrument noise, and then assess the impacts on the resulting product accuracy. And any remainder, of course, between the accuracy target that the community specified and that which the instrument can provide is an allocation of uncertainty to the products themselves, or to algorithm error. So I'll describe this in a little bit greater detail, but first I want to talk about where this noise comes from. And this is the instrument model. We do have a model of a radiometric model of the instrument sensitivity for SBG. Based on historical precedent that's been validated in many missions, both airborne and spaceborne. And this is an example of a point design with the current best estimate with the total signal to noise requirement specified by the decadal survey at a couple representative wavelengths here in red. And the decadal survey called for a signal to noise ratio of 400 in the VSNIR, that is the visible near infrared range, and then in the shortwave infrared range, 250. And you can see that we already have point designs using existing technology that will meet these SNR requirements with some margin. So this gives us good confidence that we can potentially build an instrument like this that meets the decadal survey requirements. But it leaves open the question that I'll address now about whether that signal to noise is sufficient to produce the product accuracy the community demands. So here's a graphical depiction of the process that I described before. Let's forget the math initially and focus on this plot in the lower left. Imagine a one-channel spectrometer with radiance in one channel, and here we're plotting on the vertical axis the geophysical parameter of interest. It might be coral coverage fraction, for instance. Now, the physical relationship that we can simulate between these two quantities using radiative transfer models is intrinsically nonlinear. However, for any reference observation, we can describe a locally linear retrieval or a locally linear relationship between radiance and the geophysical parameter, which is valid in the vicinity of this radiance observation. So if we're looking at small noise perturbations to this reference observation, the locally linear relationship is accurate. So this is simply a first order Taylor series expansion. We have our linearized retrieval and the instrument noise, which is Gaussian from the instrument model, and we can calculate the noise equivalent retrieval error. That is the noise equivalent change in the quantity of interest, the error induced by instrument noise on our observations. So this allows us to map that signal to noise curve, that instrument model that I showed you before, onto the induced error in our quantities of interest for all of the reference observations that we care to simulate. Now, of course, we attend to the specific wavelength ranges that hold each of the features of interest. So here are 3 representative cases with the reflectance here in the top row, and in the bottom row, the equivalent linear coefficients of that multilinear relationship. So you can see that in the case of estimating soil fractional cover, which is one of the SBG products, we're highly overdetermined because the spectrometer, we can use the full spectral range to discriminate between soil and green vegetation. And you can see that the retrieval cues on this red edge here, which is a distinctive feature of green vegetation, and other features across the wavelength range. And this is all done in radiant space. We're highly overdetermined in this case because there are so many different channels, lots of information to combine. So the measurement noise from the instrument that I described before would imply a soil fractional coverage error of less than 1%. So most of the error in these sorts of retrievals will come from calibration or modeling related error. Here are 2 other examples. Here's a non-photosynthetic vegetation fractional cover where we use a different wavelength range constrained to the short wave to capture these lignocellulose features. And for a mineral feature of montmorillonite, looking at the retrieval of a montmorillonite spectral feature here out in the shortwave infrared and measuring the depth of this feature. Here, the measurement is not quite as precise, of course, because we're combining many fewer spectral channels in our measurement. And we have to take into account, of course, the noise, which is going to be different in every one of these channels. So this is the way that the error propagation works. Let me show you now a live example of this and how this is folded into the document called the Science and Applications Traceability Matrix that we're producing for our SRR. Now, those of you who've been following SBG may remember a Science and Applications Traceability Matrix that was produced for our initial architecture study. And this is a document that relates the top-level science questions from the decadal survey to the specific instrument capabilities that we intend to produce. And it was used in order to specify the architecture that SBG should follow. That is, that it should have a single satellite for each of the shortwave, the VSWIR instrument and the thermal infrared instrument, that it should have a coverage of approximately 16 days or better, repeat cycle, and a swath width that's about 180 kilometers. So all of these architectural level decisions were informed by that Science and Applications Traceability Matrix. Here we're elaborating the matrix even further with specific products that will address each of the decadal survey science questions and the error budgets that I alluded to before. So let me take you to that now. Here's the document, and you can see in the zoomed out version of the Excel spreadsheet, it's actually a very large document. The blue columns on the left side are all from the decadal survey, detailing each of the science questions, the top level science questions that SBG intends to address, moving more specifically into geophysical parameters. And then this gray section here is all of the specific instrument and product details that we've added, describing how our system will address those objectives. So to give you an idea of the information that this matrix contains, let me zoom in on one particular row, this top one that talks about snow retrievals. So here, hopefully you can all see this on your screens. I understand that the letters are a little small, but I'll go through them column by column. So the top level area is the global hydrological and water resources, hydrological cycles and water resources. The specific applications area involves the coupling of water and energy, and this leads to the decadal survey question of how the water cycle is changing. This in turn breaks down into specific decadal science and application objectives, such as developing integrated Earth system analyses with observational inputs to quantify the components of the water and energy cycles, to quantify rates of snow accumulation, snow melt, ice melt, etc. Both of these were given prioritization of most important by the decadal survey, and indeed there are several other questions that rank most important in terms of their prioritization of the science questions that we should really be focusing on. The decadal survey breaks it down into specific biogeophysical parameters such as snow and glacier albedo and surface temperature that we should be addressing in order to meet those objectives. So now moving on to what this team has added to the Science and Applications Traceability Matrix. You can see the applications enabled for if each of these science questions were addressed, if we're able to measure these biogeophysical parameters, including water resource management and drought watering and many others. There's a listing of the products here, which includes specifically snow and ice coverage fraction, snow surface reflectance, and snow grain size, which is used to calculate snow albedo. And for each of these, in parentheses, we've provided the community requested accuracy targets for each of these products. We have a preliminary algorithmic approach, and for each of these products, you'll see in subsequent presentations what that algorithmic approach is, the instrument performance specifications, and then the green 3 columns are different elements of our error budget allocation. The first one being an allocation due to measurement noise, the second one being an allocation due to calibration error in the instrument, and the third are allocation to any algorithmic uncertainties or algorithmic modeling errors, including atmospheric correction errors and interpretations of the snow reflectance spectrum. And so you can see in this case that our allocation for snow cover due to measurement noise is actually quite small. And this is because, similar to the fractional cover case that I showed you before, we are actually very numerically overdetermined. We can get snow information from a broad region of the spectrum with many channels. So this leaves a pretty high uncertainty allocation for the algorithm. So this is a very good place to be from the perspective of instrument design. We have good margin in this particular measurement. Okay, so this is the Science and Applications Traceability Matrix. Let me show you now what this looks like in terms of just the error budgets for all of the SBG products. So here I've extracted the error budgets for each of our products. And again, each of these products will be described in much greater detail in subsequent presentations. But we have the snow products that I spoke about before, phytoplankton and other benthic reflectants for the aquatic regimes, a bunch of different canopy traits, soil surface chemistry and mineralogy, and then mineral composition as well. So there really just is a broad range of different products, but we've tried to capture reasonable observation reference cases for each of these, and here are the associated error budgets. And you'll see that they differ depending on how difficult each of these measurements is. For phytoplankton, for instance, we have a much higher allocation, a much higher allocation of our error to instrument noise, because this is a much subtler kind of measurement than many of the broad fractional cover measurements that we're trying to make in the terrestrial regime. So this really lets us form a very quantitative understanding of which are driving science cases and how both instrument measurement noise and calibration error can impact those different science questions in the decadal survey. So what are our key takeaways from this exercise? Well, the key one is that the current SBG instrument performance requirements provide sufficient accuracy across the primary SBG products. So we have a point design of products, of the instruments, that closes in terms of providing community requested accuracies based on the decadal survey's instrument requirements that will address the key questions that survey outlined. We find that the radiometric sensitivity needs are driven primarily by aquatic studies in the visible near infrared. These are our most subtle observations in that wavelength range. In the shortwave infrared, terrestrial ecology will be the most challenging from the perspective of radiometric precision. We find also in terms of calibration that the aquatic needs will drive most of our calibration needs. And this has led us to specify a calibration requirement of 5% absolute calibration in the visible near infrared to achieve those challenging aquatic objectives, and 10% in the shortwave infrared, where our other terrestrial objectives are slightly less sensitive to calibration. So this remains a work in progress as the Science and Applications Traceability Matrix is refined. We will put it out for community analysis and comments. So we definitely want to be transparent in these analyses and in our conclusions too. But anyway, this gives us a good feeling that the preliminary point design would address the decadal survey needs. So with that, I will hand it back to our next speaker, which I believe is Phil Broderick.
Sorry, having trouble with my mute button. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you so much, David. So now that we've gotten a sense about what the overall project science and application goals are, as well as how that SATEM has been derived. We're going to take a little bit of a transition to taking a little bit of a deeper dive into each one of the algorithms that we're going to propose to use as we move forward towards SRR, both from the calibration and reflectance side, and then all the way into each subject domain. And before I even get into laying out the overall kind of algorithm project workflow, I really want to just drive home that we really think about this as a system of systems. So it's inherently difficult, just as it is in ecology or various domains of earth science, to separate out various components that you're thinking about. So that's true in terms of our retrieval algorithm as well. Everything is interconnected. The way that we retrieve a reflectance signature influences the way that a biophysical retrieval is done subsequently. And so we try to think about that in the way that this overall system is designed. So if you take a look here over on the left, we see data products are going to be shown in blue, and processing steps are going to be shown in green or with green outlines. And we start, as we always do, at the instrument. So at the focal plane array, we have a series of readouts that are going to tell us what the instrument is actually measuring. And then before that's even brought down onto the ground for science, there's a series of onboard processing steps that happen. And those are going to handle things like cloud screening and compression, which is critical in order to minimize the total amount of volume that we're downloading. Because, of course, with the WAD swap and rapid repeat, this is a lot of data coming through. Once it makes it down to the ground, then there's a data reassembly stage where data are pulled together into a digital number cube and associated engineering data. And that's kind of usually where many of us as scientists think about the process as starting. But it's important to remember that all of this has happened ahead of time. That digital number cube then goes forward into two subsequent processes. One is calibration and one is geolocation. And on the calibration side, we end up with a measured radiance at the sensor, along with spectral response functions, bad pixel maps, and all the things that help us quantify the uncertainty and the error going forward. And then on the geolocation side, we know where each pixel is and what the sensor and solar geometries are. From here, things begin to get a little bit more complicated. So we have a cloud masking step that goes on where we're going to identify where clouds, shade, and cloud edges are. And that feeds into a stratification step along with the measured radiance, whereby we make a rough designation about what the surface category type is. And the purpose of this is not to explicitly say for downstream use what the surface was. It's in order for us to get the best surface and atmospheric modeling, or colloquially atmospheric correction result out of the procedure. And so that's so that we can understand when state vector terms like glint might need to be included into the model. So that happens, things get pushed forward into this surface and atmospheric modeling, and we end up with our surface reflectance, or HDRF, which you're going to hear about in a little bit, or into your aquatic reflectance, along with the commensurate uncertainties. From here, we move forward along with the cloud and shade masking into a surface fractional cover. This is the step where we start getting quantitative about the explicit designation of how much of each different surface component is present within each pixel. This is information which is going to be critical in each one of the subsequent subdomains that are going to actually use these results in those resulting algorithms. And here is where those domains are. And so we have, of course, the plant composition, function, and structure, geology and soils, snow physics, and aquatic biogeochemistry and composition. Now, these end up being too intertangled to show clearly, so I'm going to leave that to each one of the coordinators that you're going to hear from next to break out how data passes through the entire algorithm chain. And so with that, I'll note that today, just for the sake of time, we don't have too much time to talk about the onboard processing or the cloud masking steps. We're going to try to make it through each one of the other ones. And we can start with Regina and with calibration.
Thanks, Phil. So yeah, hello, my name is Regina Eckert. I'm part of the radiance as well as the reflectance kind of team here for the SBG VSWIR instrument. So today I'll be talking a little bit about the calibration plan that we have in place for SBG. If you could move to the next slide. All right, thank you so much. Yes, so our calibration approach is very much informed by all of our many years of experience with all of the AVIRIS instruments, as well as EMIT and other imaging spectrometers. So as we can see here, we have the calibration approach kind of pipeline, but this is informed by also calibration measurements that are done in the lab. So there's some things that aren't necessarily shown here, like the wavelength calibration, as well as the polarization characterization of the instrument that we'll be doing. But as far as the actual processing goes, kind of the basic steps here that we get our raw frame in, we deal with dark subtraction, then we do a flat fielding effect, which basically normalizes all of our pixels to each other. Then we can deal with stray light as well as bad pixels. And then we can apply our radiometric calibration coefficients, which translate all of these pixels that we process to be kind of on the level playing field into a radiance. That is a kind of scientific value, so we know how much light and at what spectral wavelengths we've measured them at. So that gives us our calibrated radiance frame. From there, we additionally are doing a destriping algorithm, which has been developed using EMIT's global data. And so this is basically, we have some very small differences in pixel responsivity that change over time. And because we have a push broom imaging spectrometer that we're basically pushing across the surface of the Earth, if you have these small changes in responsivity in pixels next to each other, they're going to show up as kind of stripes in the image. Which are very small and quite cosmetic. But one awesome thing about the human eye is that it's really, really good at picking up things like stripes. So there's a destriping algorithm that we then apply to just make sure that that cosmetic difference goes away. All right, next slide. One of the excellent advances in recent years for imaging spectrometers has been a lot of great work during the alignment and then also some slight onboard adjustments to the uniformity of the instrument. So we can see that here in the EMIT laboratory calibration, we got excellent uniformity, and we will be striving for the same thing with SBG, and we believe we can meet that. Next slide. And this basically gives a much better improvement over previous historical imaging spectrometers such as Hyperion and Chrism, where for different channels we didn't necessarily have the same like wavelength sampling and different things like that. So we have a lot of confidence in our ability to put this together and to calibrate this instrument to this high degree of uniformity. Next slide. We've been able to show with EMIT that we are able to, with this calibration routine that I've talked about, have a really good matchup with in situ data, shown both on the radiance side and then in the reflectance as well. Slide. Another thing that we're doing with EMIT is we're using things from the Earth itself to do calibration, so such as dark masks as well as flat fielding. So this is the EMIT dark mask, which we will plan to also use for SBG. So the basic idea here is that we're using areas of the Earth that we know to be dark, so excluding places that have man-made illumination, as well as even a lot of high ship traffic that can cause a lot of illumination at night. We mask out these areas and capture dark captures over these unilluminated areas and use that as our dark frames. We've seen with EMIT that this is a highly effective way to go, and we've seen no drift in our, well, very little drift, that is, in the dark due to this method. And so we have high confidence in this method. Next slide. Finally, we'll be using the same geolocation kind of approach as EMIT as well. So in this case, we are using automated tie points to tie our geolocation points together to Landsat ortho bases. Phil, you might be able to say if that's ortho base is probably not the right word there, but in any case, we're tying things to Landsat, and we are able to then do a really good geolocation on our imagery, and that has been true for EMIT as well as AVIRIS instruments, and that's our plan to go forward with the SBG as well. All right. And finally, we'll get back here to this destriping algorithm that I mentioned before. So you'll see over here on the left, again, without destriping, basically what we're doing here in order to correct for the stripes that you're seeing on the left is we're aggregating many frames together, and we're able to see that, yes, indeed, we have these like small variations in pixels that create these stripes. And so by doing this, we can then estimate what's kind of this, in-flight flat field that we can update our calibration with in order to get rid of these stripes and get a much better image on the right. All right. Next slide. And with that, I will hand it back to David to talk more about our reflectance algorithm.
Thank you, Regina. So after we've done the calibration from raw data numbers to radiance at sensor, the next step in all of the SBG primary products will be to infer the surface reflectance. So all of the Earth surface studies use surface reflectance spectra. So that's, broadly speaking, the ratio of the light that comes off the surface in the direction of the sensor to the total downwelling illumination onto that surface. But because we only see the radiance at sensor, we are also measuring all of the effects due to the intervening atmosphere, the absorption and scattering of photons in their path from the sun to the ground to SBG VSWIR. So the atmospheric correction step is, although it's been colloquially termed that, it's really a model inversion where we try to estimate the surface and atmospheric state using the spectral information itself in order to figure out what the surface reflectance component of that signal is. And it's important to do it using the spectral data itself because the atmosphere is very spatiotemporally variable. So this is a technique that, again, we're borrowing from EMIT that's been refined through airborne campaigns as well as space-based observations, and is currently being delivered to the DAC as part of the EMIT operational mission products. And we're adapting it here to SBG. Next slide. So fundamentally, the sensor receives photons from varied paths, including the sun to ground to sensor path, as well as other photons that don't interact with the surface at all, that are scattered off of molecules or particles in the atmosphere and reach the sensor. So the objective here is to try and fit the state parameters that best describe the system, including these elements here that you see written in blue, the column water vapor, which is very spatiotemporally variable and has a huge impact on the radiant spectrum by water vapor absorption. The spectral surface reflectance, which is all of our Earth surface signals of interest live, and then the aerosol optical depth. Currently, this is simply a single number, the aerosol optical depth at 550 nanometers, presuming a specific scattering aerosol type. But in the future, we hope to make this retrieval more flexible with maybe an additional aerosol parameter like the angstrom exponent that would allow us to better handle varied aerosol types as well. So you can see on the right side examples of the radiant spectrum at sensor and the associated reflectance spectrum after all of these atmospheric effects have been removed. Next slide. In addition, the SBG radiative transfer model that's the basis of this inversion will include a lot of pixel-specific effects that haven't always historically been accounted for in traditional atmospheric correction algorithms. We really want to be precise about the specific observing path that each pixel sees based on the sensor geometry. So on a pixel-specific basis, we want to account for the specific angle of observation, the specific elevation of that pixel, which affects the atmospheric column length, any topographic effects, which include local slope, for instance, that could tilt the surface towards or away from the sun and receive more or less solar incident radiation. There are additional elements of the state vector that we might want to include specifically for SBG and that we're investigating incorporating into this model, including glint, so that we can simultaneously estimate surface sun glint together with the atmosphere for superior aquatic reflectance retrievals. In addition, the pressure altitude is likely to be a free parameter in our retrievals because, again, this bears on the variable optical path, and we can actually, in many cases, fit a pressure altitude that's more precise than that which would be given by the digital elevation model itself. I should note that all of these reflectances that I'm talking about are the hemispherical directional reflectance factor. That is, again, the reflectance as measured in the direction of the sensor. So many Earth surface spectroscopists use BRDF corrections to try and simulate alternative viewing geometries from that which the instrument actually observed. We aren't doing that at the reflectance stage. That will be left to the downstream processing for those case-specific algorithms. Next slide. I mentioned glint before, so we're taking very seriously our charter obligation to serve the aquatic community as well, and this requires grappling directly with sun glint, and we're taking a multi-pronged approach to this. So first of all, it's built into the mission design. SBG will be tilted in the anti-sun direction slightly to minimize the amount of glint. Secondly, we're incorporating glint into the surface and atmosphere modeling, like I mentioned before, by incorporating a glint model into our state vector that we'll be inverting in this process of atmospheric correction. And as a backup, we also have post hoc filtering options. So an example of this appears on the right side. This is an example provided by Adam Kloos showing how this airborne acquisition spanning a range of different viewing geometries experiences a lot of sun glint initially, but that one can estimate the glint from the spectrum itself and then correct it to achieve the result on the bottom row. Next slide. For all of these atmospheric correction inversions, we're dealing with an ill-posed problem. That is, the number of variables that we're attempting to estimate is more than the number of spectral channels that we have in our measurement. And so we need some way to apply an additional constraint to make the problem invertible. And the way that we've done this in our point design is through a Bayesian probabilistic approach, where the constraints are in the forms of statistical priors, that is background knowledge about the kinds of legal surface reflectances that can physically appear in reality. For example, encoding the knowledge that there shouldn't be step discontinuities in the surface reflectance spectrum. And that's expressed in Bayes' rule in the following way. You can see this probability of our state vector x given our measurement y breaks down in terms of a likelihood term, probability of y given x. That relates to the state vector, how well the state vector explains the measurement, and then a prior probability, probability of x, which, like I said, encodes our background knowledge. We can forget about the denominator here because it's constant everywhere. If we take the logarithm of this expression, then we get something like the following in the next slide. There you see our cost function that again has our model matched to measurement, and this is all multivariate Gaussian distributions because we can locally within our state space use multivariate Gaussians to describe our probability density. You see our instrument noise is captured here in the S sub epsilon covariance matrix. And that first term describes how well our state vector, when we push it through our forward model, actually fits the measurement that we made. The second term is our Bayesian prior, which penalizes huge departures from what our background knowledge tells us are reasonable values for those state vector elements. So that is our soft constraint that we apply to reduce the effective number of degrees of freedom and make the problem invertible. And we can solve this problem by sequential nonlinear optimization. Next slide. So this graphic describes that. The step is to first make some initial guess at what our reflectance and atmospheric state vectors are. And then we predict the radiance at spectrum. We can use the difference to basically take partial derivatives of our cost function with respect to changes in our state vector and nudge our state vector in the direction of improving that cost function or improving the posterior probability of x given y. And this allows us to optimize the fit simultaneously with our match to the prior and converge at an optimum solution, typically within half a dozen iterations. Next slide. So here's a visible description of that. In the cartoon at lower left, you see the probability density as a surface, with the horizontal axes being our atmosphere and surface state vector elements. We started an initial guess and do local hill climbing of the probability, maximizing our model's fit to the measurement, subject to the prior. We can also calculate a local posterior probability distribution, that is the posterior uncertainties that would be caused by the instrument noise, that is the S sub epsilon. And you can see that expression up top and some examples of that on the right side. This is with an emit example showing retrievals for vegetation and soil types, and uncertainty envelope showing the probability really our uncertainty, our 1 sigma uncertainty in the reflectance at each wavelength. Even though we have a full covariance matrix with correlated errors for all of these, we're just showing the channel-wise error bars here. And you can see that in areas of low signal, where there's higher instrument noise, like in the very longest wavelengths, we have a correspondingly higher uncertainty in the reflectance result. And this architecture, this formalism also allows us to bookkeep things like known calibration errors or other sources of model discrepancy between our radiative transfer model and reality. So we can actually use this as quite a flexible way to represent lots of different kinds of uncertainties and propagate them forward to downstream analyses. Next slide. So here's a pictorial description of what this looks like in practice. This is from a manuscript by Phil Broderick that I think is a really elegant portrayal of this disentangling of the radiant signal into the surface and atmosphere components. Here you see a wildfire smoke plume on the left. This is the radiance channels in red, green, and blue, but of course we have a full spectrum for each of those pixels. And you can see the atmospheric correction result in the next two panels, the estimated surface reflectance under the smoke plume in the center panel, and on the right panel, the estimated aerosol optical depth of the smoke plume. So this demonstrates the kind of model inversion that we aim to do with SBG. Next slide. All right, and with that, I'll pass it back to Phil to talk about surface fractional cover products.
All right, so the last step before we make it through to each one of the subdomains is to run a unmixing step in order to retrieve the fractional contribution of each of a variety of end members to the scene. So before we go there, I'll just bring it back to this figure that Rob showed us at the beginning. And, you know, we really think of, well, there are a variety of locations across the planet where you're seeing relatively pure pixels, maybe in the open ocean or the open desert. The majority of the Earth, perhaps, is covered in things that are really mixtures of 1, 2, 3, or even 4 of these components together. And so, particularly at the 30-meter scale, mixed pixels are really the norm and not the exception. So we need to be treating this in a fairly robust way. Fortunately, we have a long legacy of doing that, and there's a lot of literature to draw on. So here we're building off of contributions by Dar Roberts, Greg Asner, Phil Dennison, many others. And here we're using an approach put together by Francisco Ochoa for the EMIT mission, whereby we use the surface reflectance that's brought into this function into what we call a candidate reflectance generator, which is just drawing over the distribution using the uncertainties that are brought together with the HDRF in order to come up with candidate plausible reflectances. In each one of those cases, we also come up with a candidate set of end members drawn from a spectral library that's been built from a global set of field measurements and then convolved to the SBG wavelengths. And then those together, those candidate end members, as well as those candidate reflectances, are bootstrapped into a spectral mixture analysis where they're linearly unmixed in order to retrieve the best possible fractional cover and also estimate the uncertainty both from the model as well as from the propagated measurement. So that's kind of the fractional cover step in a nutshell. And here's a demonstration of what that might look like. Sorry, snow and ice community in this southern LA scene. We didn't have any snow pixels to show, but the rest of the 4 domains are captured quite nicely. And we have a lot of reason to believe that this would work in the snow community as well. So with that, I think we can bring it forward and transition to the first one of our aquatic domains. Notice I didn't talk about how those fractional cover products linked back to the decadal, but that's going to be covered by each one of my colleagues in subsequent sections. So here I'll transition over to Kelly to talk about the aquatic biogeochemistry and composition.
Thanks, Phil. Aloha mai kako. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Lewis, and I'm very excited to support the VSWIR team as an aquatic coordinator. And today we're going to briefly walk through the aquatic biogeochemistry and composition products that are really grounded in the decadal and that have come out of resources shared from the SBG algorithm and applications working group. And we can kind of see how it's all connected in this next slide that looks at a subset of the science and applications traceability matrix that David presented earlier. And on our left-hand side, we can see that the decadal objectives that were really driven by for E1A is to really look at the aquatic ecosystem structure and function change over space and time. This is a very important priority that's essential to getting us to E1C, which is looking at physiological dynamics of aquatic primary producers, which is of most importance. How this translates to geophysical parameters and products, we see first that we need to provide the aquatic community with an aquatic reflectance product, and remote sensing reflectance is foundational to getting to biogeochemistry products such as pigment concentrations, as well as habitat classification. so benthic composition in this case. And we see when we trace from the decadal to the products, we can enable a multitude of aquatic applications like the ones we see listed here. And on this next slide, what we're going to do is introduce an evolving framework we're using to think through how we can go from connecting those surface atmospheric modeling outputs to the core products that link to the decadal and the applications. So here we see for the inputs, we would be getting remote sensing reflectance that's starred there just to acknowledge that uncertainty will be carried over and that glint processes will be folded into the model that David mentioned earlier. In addition, what's really exciting is having surface fractional cover information. This is incredible for the aquatic community. So in advance to us going into the products, we'll be aware of pixels adjacent to liquid water that might give us a sense for what might be fluxes coming into our systems, etc. But with such an incredible amount of information, we need some type of filtering or clearinghouse step. So you can switch to this next one, and we're just seeing different examples of ways we can get to biogeochemistry and habitat classification products. And just to iterate, and I'll probably underscore this a few times, is that we're presenting examples here, but we're looking to grow this with the community, especially as SBG evolves. Next, we can look at the aquatic biogeochemistry box, and we can further parse that out by looking at inland and nearshore coastal processes that get us to biogeochemistry pigment concentration outputs on our right, so things like not only chlorophyll, but getting to things like cyanobacteria biomass, which is really important for inland harmful algal bloom monitoring, but in addition, looking at coastal and open ocean processes that can also get us to really important pigment concentrations. We can also then do the same exercise with habitat classification and looking at surface aquatic ecosystems, getting to things like wetland fractional cover, but also looking at benthic ecosystems. And as my last reminder, this is going to grow with the community, and I think a lot of us are very excited to see how this is going to evolve. And we're going to have Christine Lee next walk through that inland and nearshore coastal box. So I'll turn it over to Christine Lee, also our aquatic co-coordinator. So I'll just walk through a quick example using Intimate Image Cube. That was acquired over San Luis Reservoir, which is a inland water body reservoir in California. This was acquired in summer of last year. It's also, since it's human-made, it's very well managed. And so we thought that this would be a really nice example to not just showcase some of the SRR core product algorithms for aquatic, for chlorophyll and CI, but also to help us sort of trace through again to the applications and potential decision support. And so as you can see here, SBG will be able to take an image cube and implement these core algorithms to help us better understand and enable new science and applications related to inland aquatic processes like algal bloom dynamics. And just as an example here, at those 3 points, the green, orange, and blue extracted spectra at those points that are corresponding to different levels of estimated chlorophyll and CI concentrations and CI levels. And then, of course, on the right, just that those algorithms being implemented spatially across the lake. And if you go to the next slide, this again sort of helps us reframe and look at some of these approaches and frameworks within the context of Earth action. Again, allowing us to trace and make sure that what we're doing as a mission can have direct societal benefit. And so in that kind of bottom panel there where it says action, it provides one example of the types of decisions that could be impacted through our work with SBG and with the broader community as well. And so in this case, San Luis Reservoir is both a holding grounds for surface water, but is also used for recreational purposes. And it's also it's also, we also have been seeing potentially increases in changes in the harmful algal bloom season and other factors there as well. And so in this example, we look at the potential closure of sites that are managed for these co-benefits due to harmful algal blooms. And then extending out to other applications, we also know that SBG could have a beneficial impact in terms of addressing environmental remediation and disaster response, supporting fisheries, aquaculture, and food security applications, as well as biodiversity and conservation areas. And with that, I am going to hand off to Nicholas Bond to discuss the snow and ice domain area.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. So hi, everyone. My name is Nicholas Bond, and I'm really excited to serve as the coordinator for the snow physics subdomain of the SBG VSWIR project. And as you can see on the slide here, although intending to deliver only 3 products, snow physics are actually one of the most important parts of the decadal survey hydrology focus area, especially due to their relevance for the Earth's water cycle, but also for climate change. Next slide, please. So the science and application objective from the decadal is to quantify rates of both snow accumulation and melt on a global scale, and in particular, how they're driven by topographic variability. And estimating spectral and broadband albedo of subpixel snow and glaciers is most important, and in particular at shortest intervals as possible. So the snow physics and hydrology subdomain is especially supporting the need for an SBG VSWIR revisit time of a maximum 16 days. Of course, we would love to have less than that, but 16 days would be really required to achieve these objectives here. According to the decadal, we'll be providing snow and ice fractional cover, snow surface reflectance, and snow grain size. The latter is utilized to estimate both the spectral and broadband albedo. And finally, the desired enabled applications include water resource management, drought monitoring, flood prediction, weather forecast, climate modeling, but also shipping and navigation around sea ice. Next slide. For the short-term SRR need, we selected a few core algorithms that have a solid base in the literature. And this is displayed with this flow diagram here on this slide. So we start with the HDRF as basically all the subdomain algorithms. So the HDRF from the atmosphere and surface modeling, we run the MEMSCAG code, so a very prominent spectral unmixing approach, which is well cited in the literature to estimate fractional cover and grain size simultaneously. As an alternative, the Nolan-Dozier model can be applied to fully snow-covered pixels to estimate grain size. And finally, we can estimate the spectral and broadband albedo given the previously calculated grain size and the HDRF. The workflow basically requires just a few auxiliary data sets, which are a NetMember spectral library, a lookup table of anisotropy factors, as well as spectral irradiances and also solar observation geometry, which we basically get from the radiance and HDRF products from SBG. Of course, uncertainty quantification is of high value as well, and we currently run simply Monte Carlo simulations to get an estimate of the product error budget based on the HDRF uncertainty. This should finally be replaced by a comprehensive error propagation later on, so basically to push through the uncertainties coming from the reflectors from the HDRF to the final product. Next slide, please. So on the next few slides, I give a brief walk through the product generation workflow. And for snow physics, it's especially important to start at the radiance level, since retrieved HDRF is extremely sensitive to the forward model parameterization in the case of snow. And we really need to consider both topography and anisotropy while inferring atmosphere and surface state, since snow and ice surfaces are really sensitive to these physical processes and are under specific observation in solar geometries extremely forward scattering, and we won't get the desired outcome of products if not accounting for these characteristics. Next slide, please. Once the HDRF is retrieved, we can apply the spectral unmixing based on the library of spectral head members. This gives us the snow fractional cover and grain size. Here you can see a nice emit example from the Italian Alps. This is the Aosta Valley. Next slide. And the final step then is to convert the retrieved HDRF to spectral and broadband albedo by considering the retrieved grain size and also the solar and observation geometry. Since the anisotropy factors are a function of grain size and geometry, so we need all these information to calculate the spectral albedo, and then we need the spectral irradiances to integrate over the entire wavelength ranges to calculate basically the broadband albedo for each single pixel. And you can see the example of this emit scene on the lower right hand corner here. The resulting albedo estimations are actually the critical part of the decadal objectives and are finally used to enable a bunch of applications. Next slide. And based on the data product and the information and knowledge we gain by applying the core algorithms, SBG VSWIR will finally help decision makers and stakeholders to take focused action on, for example, improved flood forecasting from snowmelt or water resources management, that is fresh water supply or availability. Yeah, and with this, I just sent over to Dana Chadwick to talk about terrestrial ecosystems.
All right. Hi, folks. So I'm very excited to be here to talk with you all today and share kind of the current state of the terrestrial vegetation, or what we're calling plant composition, function, and structure. And so this is kind of this top portion of the kind of downstream products here. So Phil, if you can go ahead. And a variety of the vegetation products really kind of get at or help us understand a series of kind of 4 of the decadal science and applications objectives, 3 most important and a very important. And I'm including in here kind of photosynthetic vegetation and non-photosynthetic vegetation cover, because that's actually a really important component, you know, as we move through seasonal cycles, as things senesce, that transition. But I'm not really going to talk about that process here. So this is kind of harkening back to Phil's fractional cover discussion previously. So, but those, but that in particular is a really important product that's associated with, you know, wildfire fuel mapping, kind of agricultural practices, a variety of other things, including vegetation health. But there's also, you know, then focusing more on kind of the algorithms that are going to be applied to photosynthetic vegetation in particular, including estimates of canopy foliar nitrogen content, leaf water content, and then as well as things like equivalent water thickness. Okay, if you go ahead. So this is kind of a little bit of a detailed step through here. So I'll kind of walk through these in a little more detail. Apologies, I know many of you are calling in. So the first one that I'll talk through is kind of the equivalent water thickness or canopy water content, which is derived directly from the surface reflectant HRDF using the Beer-Lambert absorption model. This was, you know, worked on heavily by Rob Green and Nicholas here, which is awesome. And then will produce equivalent water thickness and the uncertainties associated with that kind of directly. So it's a fairly straightforward flow at this point. And then I'm using canopy nitrogen, canopy foliar nitrogen percent, dry weight percent, as an example of a foliar kind of trait that we would be producing, but this is true for many traits that are kind of that where partial least squares regression has been kind of traditionally used as the algorithm method. So here we would start out by doing some amount of masking to ensure that we are focusing this algorithm down on photosynthetic vegetation in particular, and then doing any necessary reflectance adjustments, including potentially BRDF and brightness normalization, as has been done kind of in many different parts of literature, and then applying a PLSR model, which would, algorithm coefficients are kind of still to be determined exactly, but the PLSR model strategy has a long heritage in the literature and has been very well established that it can estimate a variety of these traits throughout a variety of different ecosystems. So, and that will give us foliar nitrogen concentration and then an associated uncertainty. And I'll just wanted to make some notes here that, we are going to be, soliciting community engagement here, that we're exploring kind of some additional versions of that. So like functional PLSR approaches, Bayesian informed approaches, model ensembles to determine uncertainty, or kind of advancing uncertainty for PLSR strategies. But for SRR, we have this kind of core strategy that has been demonstrated a variety of times, and hopefully we can only improve on that. So if you want to move to the next slide, please. And so this is just for those of us that are more visual, this is what we're seeing here is a reflectance cube on the left of an area in Northern California that spans from kind of the Central Valley with a lot of agriculture up into kind of through an area of rangeland and chaparral and into a forested region kind of at the high elevations, accompanied by a reflectance a figure that shows reflectance spectra for a variety of different types of ecosystems to kind of give a sense of the differences that we can see across vegetated regions. And then this would be then fit with those water coefficients, and then can be, in this case, this is a equivalent water thickness figure that was generated for this same set of area, where we can see that there's kind of a higher amount of EWT in forested regions, as well as these kind of low-lying agricultural regions. So go ahead. And just to kind of touch back on the terrestrial vegetation applications component. So this is, kind of moving from data in the same kind of format into information around kind of the health of vegetation, how much photosynthetic versus non-photosynthetic vegetation occurs in any given location, and kind of transferring that into types of action, including things like conservation, wildfire risk management, a variety of agricultural applications, including disease detection, water stress, nutrient deficiencies, and then kind of just more broadly ecosystem condition and status. And so with that, I have the great pleasure of handing it back to Rob Green, who's going to talk about the geology and soils component of the algorithms. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dana, and everyone so far. Again, I'll bring us home with the geology and soils, which is part of the solid earth and interior focus from the decadal survey. So that's how it fits in. Here are the applications and science objectives from the decadal, the priorities, suggested biophysical parameters. They often relate to the spectral properties of the soils and the geological minerals that are present. And we have estimates, thanks to David, of the uncertainties that we can trace, and then a series of applications that will enable with these measurements of surface geology, soil, and mineralogy. So next. The algorithm will draw heavily from EMIT, which is a mineral and geology-focused space mission using a full VSWIR spectrometer, where we use spectral fitting to determine the different mineral types and report both their occurrence, are they present, their spectral abundance, and carry along the uncertainty or confidence in those determinations. Next. We're building on algorithms that come out of the USGS, the Roger Clark and Ray Coakley and Greg Swayze and others. As a wonderful example from EMIT, on the upper left, you're seeing EMIT reflectance spectra, single spectra for a geologically interesting area, We use a spectral fitting type algorithm against the USGS spectral library, which is quite comprehensive and has elements of abundance characterization with X-ray diffraction and other methods as well. So from that, we can go from the emit reflectance to maps of surface mineralogy, here mapping iron oxide minerals in the center panel, and then the sulfates, carbonates, and clay class minerals in the right planet. So we have good leverage based on their spectral fingerprints to map geology and then use that to address the decadal priorities. Next. I wanted to throw this in as a wonderful example of geology and this concept of harmonization as we get different imaging spectrometers to deliver similar products by providing the information with good characterization. So this is a case on the left where we have a column of results from Average Classic a number of years ago up in the Black Rock Playa area. And then in the middle, we have the results from MIT. And then on the right, we have the results from NMAP. So these are 3 different spectrometers at 3 different times. They have different spatial spectral scales. But because the right characterization information is delivered with each of the measurements, this algorithm can produce comparable results. And that's the sort of thing we want to enable with emit with SBG going forward. And we're testing right now with emit and these other instruments. So next. Again, for applications, we'll be mapping minerals over the surface of the Earth. We'll be able to give information about strategic minerals. We've already seen lithium-bearing minerals in emit measurements. We can use these for environmental assessment and remediation. Perhaps acid mine drainage would be an example, and of course, mineral dust impacts, some of which contain asbestos, and based on particle size, can also be a risk. So there's multiple applications that will accrue from new comprehensive high quality mineral determinations for the planet. Next, I think that may be it for minerals. I want to sort of wrap up and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions, I'm hoping. What we tried to show you here are the work of this coordinator team as we support the SBG project, the science and applications, getting ready for the system requirements review coming up at the end of September. We've shown, refined traceability of the decadal survey priorities that's informed by subsequent studies and analyses by David Thompson and others. We presented a set of baseline core products as we go from radiance to reflectance to fractional cover to aquatic, terrestrial, snow, geology, and the atmosphere. Those are selected based on maturity to control for risk, cost, and schedule. SBG is a cost-constrained mission and something we need to keep very much in the forefront as we go forward, achieving the objectives most effectively. The project is committed to deliver radiance and reflectance products with uncertainty and full characterization as well, especially to enable the diverse set and broad set of additional community algorithms. We're aware that we've got a limited set. They're aligned straight at the decadal survey priorities, but we want to enable the maximum diversity, and we want your feedback on how we're delivering both the radiance and the reflectance to support that. Next. And this is the second slide. We've talked a little bit through here. Hopefully you've picked up hints of calibration, uncertainty quantification, verification, parameterization, validation, harmonization, and we're incorporating those through this process and communicating those. The SBG VSWIR project science application is informed by the latest results from EMIT, which is very, very encouraging lesson to test some of these algorithms and approaches with real measurements from space. We're planning another review, and we may actually have another one based on making sure people have access to this information in August. And ideally, we would team that one with the TIR, because SBG is a mission that involves both VSWIR and TIR, though we've focused here just with a limited time on the VSWIR and where we sit as we head towards SRR. Now, looking forward, following SRR in the NASA life cycle process, we'll next move to prepare for the preliminary design review, where these requirements and approaches will begin refined, and we'll make sure we have understanding of how we would design them in a preliminary sense to implement this part of SBG within the cost constraints. Also, we're reaching out to you as we're letting this project and science application team grow with your inputs and feedbacks. So next. So this is the group you've heard from today, and this group, there are others involved who've been providing input and feedback as we've reached out to them, and this team will grow. So these are people you can reach out to today with follow-up questions, and we're all eager to interact and move things forward for a successful SRR and a successful path for SBG through the life cycle to orbit and making these measurements and delivering the full set of products for both science and applications. Now there's a form there I think you can reach to put additional questions and comments. And with that, I think I'll hand it back to Phil. I think that was maybe the last start here.
Perfect. So yeah, I'll invite anyone who has any questions to put those into the Q&A. You should be able to see at the bottom of the screen. I do acknowledge that many folks might be on the phone and unable to reach that. Certainly, if you have the capacity to raise your hand, we can also unmute you and have you ask your question that way. But I think in the meantime, we do have a few that David's been able to take a stab at here, but maybe I'll read and we can say them out loud so that everyone can see them. So the first question was from Mark Vincent, oriented towards David, asking, how did the black SNR line satisfy the red dot from the decadal survey? Or did you mean the line was close to satisfying? David, can you take that on?
Sure, and I'll just share my screen briefly to make it clear. Stand by. Okay, so this was the slide in question, and the question was how the black line means that we're satisfying our SNR requirements. Here, the red dots represent the requirements that were prescribed by the decadal survey. So in order to achieve those, in order to satisfy those requirements, the point design's signal-to-noise ratio for this reference observation has to be greater than those red dots wherever they appear. And because we envelope all of the red dots here, the claim is that we meet the requirements prescribed by the decadal survey with some margin. So if, for example, some component performance isn't as good as we're anticipating, there's enough distance here that we can accommodate those degradations in performance without endangering our fundamental science.
Perfect. Hopefully that resolves the question. We do have a couple more questions, but really quickly, Dana, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up for those of you that are on the phone, if you do have access to Slack, we can take questions through the SBG community Slack if you're already signed up for that as well. So that can be another forum, or you can let me know your phone number and we can work on unmuting you that way. Though I realize we only have like 6 more minutes left in the webinar, so but just another way to engage. So I apologize again.
Yeah, I think we'll probably rerun this webinar at some point in the future just to make sure everyone can get access. So those of you who are on the phone, we get ready. We'll apologize, but there'll be another 90-minute slot we'll try to grab and we'll pre-test that we can get everyone access. And of course, we'll release these charts, the SATM and the recording.
Perfect. Well, we do have a few more questions, so let's try to get to those in the limited amount of time left. So the second one was from Daniel Wenkert, asking about atmospheric aerosol scattering of the return signal degrades spatial resolution. Is it possible to correct for that and get full or at least better spatial resolution? David or Regina, do you want to take a stab at that?
I can describe my answer, and then maybe Regina can add any commentary. She's really leading the charge in that algorithm development effort. So these effects, these spatial blurring effects, are commonly called adjacency effects. and it happens due to atmospheric scattering that causes photons from one pixel to land, to act as if they're coming from another. This isn't in our current code. In principle, one can correct for it, but it's technically very challenging because first, it requires getting the aerosol optical properties very accurately, and second, it induces information crosstalk between neighboring pixels. So now the surface atmosphere solution isn't just independent in every pixel. Nevertheless, we're hoping to incorporate this in the future, and Regina has some cutting-edge mathematical ideas for how that can be done.
Yeah, and I'll just add in briefly, basically, we're very excited about also just incorporating more spatial information generally in our retrieval algorithms, and this is definitely a big part of it. And especially as we go to global, areas, we're going to have a lot more humidity, and that's going to be a bigger problem versus maybe when we were confined to more desert areas. So yeah, great question.
Perfect. And then I do see that we have a question coming through, I believe from Slack, I think it's from Kevin Turpey. What are the plans to use the expanding network of system vicarious calibration buoys to perform system vicarious calibration for SBG VSWIR? That crosses a couple different domains. I don't know if either Kelly, David, or Rob have thoughts there.
I can pitch in, yes and yes. The expanding network of vicarious calibration facilities and water radiometers, I think, is going to be critical. We've always achieved our best on our on-orbit calibrations with emit using vicarious calibration, and of course, it's really useful to have targets of a similar character to the science targets of interest. So absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, and that's true for both the aquatic and the terrestrial. We expect that to be a core part of the on-orbit verification that we've launched, we said, and the validation that we're getting the parameters that are required for the decadal priorities. So we're very supportive of that network, both aquatic and terrestrial.
Great. And then we have, I think, we might only have time for one more question, but I'll try to sneak one more in, and then we will definitely reach out to all of the remaining questions and try to get everyone answers to them. But I see one that says that Nima reported from his evaluation of Landsat 8 and Sentinel-2 at the 2022 Ocean Science meeting that Sentinel-2, although its SNR is lower given its smaller pixels, that instrument artifacts are more problematic for aquatic data quality. Will the SBG project be prepared to characterize all instrument effects and provide corrections for the community or the processing stream? I think I'll send that to Regina or to David.
Go ahead, Regina.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think generally what I'm hearing in that question, apologies, I couldn't read it. So at least what I'm hearing you're asking is, are we planning to calibrate everything, and will we be providing everything to the community to look at? And I think the answer on both of those is yes. We're going to be looking at, especially for aquatics, we know that looking at polarization sensitivity as well as other effects is really important. So we'll be making sure that we're calibrating across all of those things. And then on top of that, we plan to be completely transparent in our processing, as well as providing those products to people for both calibration and then radiance and things like that. So you can also go through and see, maybe you want to do a different process. I think did that cover it? Or maybe David, you want to pick up any last pieces?
Sure. I'll just add, in addition to that, that the historically, at least with the emit detectors and signal chains that we're working with, the electronic artifacts are actually basically unmeasurable, or at least many orders of magnitude below the signal. Similarly, there are optical artifacts that in the system that that are intrinsically pretty low, and we try to correct so that those are at least 3 orders of magnitude below the signal. So we're absolutely dedicated to keeping electronic and optical artifacts from impinging on our observations and having a clean data set to work with. And nowhere is that more critical than with the aquatic observations, where the water leaving reflectance is such a small fraction of the total signal.
Yeah, and we're absolutely committing, if they're artifacts, we want to address them with you to make sure they're addressed well. We'd love for you to look into the emit data set and see how we're doing. We've collected an awful lot of aquatic data sets because there are many aquatic regimes next to the arid land regions. There are aquatic regimes next to some of our calibration sites. So if you look at the acquisition for emit, you'll find there's a high diversity of coastal, even ocean and inland water data sets that have been collected. So help us. If we see artifacts, we want to know about them. We want to work with you to understand and appropriately suppress them with doing no harm. As we all know, artifact suppression can go a little too far sometimes. So again, absolutely, it's a very high priority to deliver the very best product in concert with the community.
Great. Well, keeping an eye on the time, I know that we've made it 90 minutes in here, so I think we'll try to respond to the rest of questions that come in more directly and send out responses to the community. Again, this webinar, the slides, and the SATM will all be made available to the team. It'll probably take us a good week to get them out there, but we'll get them out there as quickly as we can. And then just a reminder to go to that URL if you'd like to join any of our mailing lists and be more actively involved. Please just sign up there and we'll be in touch. And with that, yeah, Dana.
And just a quick note that we do have the registration list. So those of you who are on who are on by phone, we will also be sending that link out to you as well as and notifying you when the slides and the recording are up, so that you can so that you will actually receive an information you don't have to check back in. So thank you again for your patience.
All right, with that, thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to the next Tech Up.
Yep. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care, everyone.